Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are all doing well. I finally got enough Stardust to build my Furrets, and that is what we are going to use. In today's video, I am also going to share with you guys probably one of the best teams I have gotten to try in this season so far. I got so many 5-0s with this team, it's kind of insane. And it's going to be Shadow Galarian Weezing on the lead, with Furret on the save swap and Guzzlord in the back. In general, this team is pretty good against the current meta that we're seeing, but also Guzzlord is a very slept on pick. Not a lot of people are using it, and not a lot of people are prepared for it. I ran into so many people running entire teams that are weak to Guzzlord. As soon as they saw my Guzzlord, they just went ahead and quit. And some of the most common Pokemon I was seeing that Guzzlord does really well against include Drapion, the ghost types that got buffs this season like Dusclops, Dusknoir, Sableye, Corsola. Guzzlord is also really good against the Psywave users, and it's also going to perform really good against Claydol. It's decent against Serperior and fire types like Talonflame and Skeleturge. And it's also going to be good against one of the most common Pokemon that I have been seeing this season, which is Mandibuzz. Oh, and also Morpeko. I cannot forget Morpeko. Morpeko has been in, I want to say, almost every other game I have played so far, again, because of the buff to Ghost types and Psywave users. So it's been really good against those Pokemon, but Guzzlord is going to wall Morpeko. I should say, however, that this team does struggle mostly against opposing Galarian Weezings because your backline isn't going to be good against that Pokemon, and your best answer to Galarian Weezing is your own Galarian Weezing. So I actually recommend having a Galarian Weezing that is attack weighted, so having one with a higher attack. That way you can win CMP and win the mirror. In my case, I was actually losing CMP to most of my opponents, and I was really struggling against that Pokemon, so I'm thinking of building another one that has higher attack. And one more thing I want to address before we get into the matches is I was using Furret as a save swap to draw out fighters like I do in this match. I draw out the Poliwrath, and then my Guzzlord should be free in the back to sweep whatever my opponent has left. And I was also using Furret to draw out the fairy types. Furret does a really good job of drawing out fairy types because obviously it's running that Sucker Punch and it's going to be resisted on fairies. And with the fairy or the fighter out of the way, Guzzlord should be able to sweep. I have a lot of hope for this team. I highly recommend it. I think a lot of you can run it and be successful with it, with, of course, good shield management and good energy management. But I'm going to stop rambling now. Let's jump straight into the battles because I have so many matches to show you guys today. In this first battle, we are going to be up against a Credilli on the lead, which at first I really struggled against. I wasn't really sure how to handle it with my team, but the more I played, the more I learned the matchups. And here you see me going for Brutal Swing, which is actually not the correct move to go for. You want to go for Sludge because it is going to be neutral against Credilli. And Sludge surprised me. It does so much neutral damage against a lot of Pokemon that I would not rely on Brutal Swing for that Weezing. Keep in mind, it also gets Stab on Sludge, so wherever you can, you want to try to go for Sludge, especially if it's neutral. Here we're able to take a Corviknight out with resisted Swifts from our Furret, which is kind of insane. Of course, the Sucker Punches were hurting, and my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be an Emolga. I decided to shield up here because I think the Acrobatics is going to be the hardest hitting move that is left on my opponent's team. So we managed to shield the Acrobatics, and then my opponent brings that Credilli back in, and I should be able to take it out with my Guzzlord. So I am going to save my final shield for Guzzlord. We can go for a Brutal Swing here, take the Credilli out, and the Emolga is basically dead. So we are going to take that win. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against an Azumarill, which is a really amazing lead for us, but also my entire team is pretty good against Azumarill because I have an answer for this Pokemon on each of my own Pokemon. We have the Trailblaze on the Furret that is going to hit for super effective, and we of course have the Sludge Bomb on our Guzzlord. My opponent swaps out into a Frostlass, which my entire team is also going to be really good against. We go for a Brutal Swing, which my opponent doesn't shield, and then I bring in Furret to farm them down. Their final Pokemon is going to be a Dragalge. I'm able to go for 2 Swifts against a Dragalge, get them into the yellow, and then I am going to bring in Guzzlord to take the Aqua Tails. My opponent throws the Aqua Tail immediately before seeing what comes in, and they're just going to go ahead and top left here. GG's to our opponent. Alright, in this next match, we are going to get to see Furret draw out a Fairy type. So I do play this lead a little bit differently now as well. Sludge does a lot of damage to Drapion, so I will go for a Sludge on the Drapion with my Weezing before swapping out, and I will try to catch the second Aqua Tail on my Furret. However, in this case, I just swap out immediately into my Furret, and we draw out a Florges. Okay, at least this Fairy type is not going to be up against my Guzzlord, and I'm really hoping that my opponent isn't running a second Fairy type. They bring that Drapion back in. I do manage to catch the Aqua Tail on my Guzzlord, and it looks like my opponent's final Pokemon is a Corsola. So unfortunate for them, but they are just going to go ahead and top left against our Guzzlord. And in that first set, we are going to get a 5-0. This was the first set I played with this team, by the way. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Talonflame on the lead. I'm going to stay in and go for a Sludge before swapping out into my Furret. That way, I can weaken this Pokemon and make it a little bit easier for my Furret to handle. I do manage to catch a Fly on Furret, which is really nice. And then my opponent brings out a Morpeko. Oh, I'm thinking this might have been the team that was entirely weak to Guzzlord. They let the Swift go, we get them into the red, and I think, oh yeah, I bring in Weezing here. I am going to have to go ahead and shield whatever they throw because it's going to hurt. They go for our Psychic Fangs, which is going to be super effective, but we manage to farm them down and come out with energy for their Talonflame. We get a shield out of them, and now here I'm thinking my opponent is going to go for Brave Bird, but they don't. They go for Fly. Their final Pokemon is Credilli. Okay, so this isn't the superior in the back. That would have been an entire team that was entirely weak to Guzzlord. But I do have to take Rock Tombs here, unfortunately, because I don't have any shields left. But my opponent doesn't have shields left either. So hopefully we can handle this with our Weezing. They are going to take our Guzzlord out now. And here I should have gone for a Sludge. Sludge probably would have KO'd. And yeah, I messed that up. If I had just gone for a Sludge against the Credilli, I wouldn't have had to save up energy on my Weezing, and I could have just gone for a Brutal Swing against their Talonflame, but my opponent is going to win that match. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Medicham on the lead, which isn't a great matchup for us, but it's also not a great matchup for them. I'm going to go straight for a Sludge against this Medicham. I did take the first Ice Punch, and here I'm going to go ahead and shield, and I think I can go for a full farm down with the Fairy Winds. Yep, we come out of that with a lot of energy, and my opponent's next Pokemon is a Blastoise. I'm thinking I just swap into one of my back Pokemon because I don't want them getting too much energy on that Blastoise. I swap into Furret, and we draw out another Credilli. So many people are running Credilli, but I do start learning how to handle this Pokemon. I am going to go for Trailblaze because that is going to be neutral against Credilli because of its rock typing. And here I'm just going to let my Furret go. I should be able to come in with Guzzlord and Dragon Tail them down. However, my opponent swaps out into Blastoise. They go for a Skull Bash, which I call and I shield, and then they go ahead and they top left. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Shadow Feraligatr on the lead. I will bait with a Brutal Swing on the first move because Shadow Feraligatr is almost always going to shield. If they let a Sludge go, it's going to do so much damage. We get a shield from them, okay, and now we should be able to outpace to 2 more Sludges before my opponent can reach 2 more Hydro Cannons. I'm going to go ahead and invest my final shield because my opponent also invested both of their shields, and I actually should have lost this match because my opponent has a Talonflame in the back. They're going to go for a Brave Bird here against our Furrets and almost knock us out. But their final Pokemon is going to be a Charjabug. I managed to land a Swift, and then I bring in my Galarian Weezing to go for a Sludge against this Charjabug, really hoping that it would KO, but they live with a little bit of HP. But then the only reason I win this is because my opponent messes up and doesn't go for a move on their Charjabug. Instead, they do one more Volt Switch. I'm able to KO them with a Dragon Tail, and then they go ahead and they top left because a Brave Bird wouldn't have been enough for our Guzzlord. I definitely should have lost that match. On to the next battle, we were up against another Medicham on the lead. Thank goodness they're running Ice Punch and not Psychic, but my opponent swaps out into a Credilli. I stay in just to damage it a little bit, that way I could make it a little bit easier for my Guzzlord to handle. I should be able to live another Rock Tomb here, and I survive with quite a bit of health on my Guzzlord that I should be able to live a lot of Psycho Cuts from the Medicham. I don't know if my opponent is going to go for a move. They have to go for a move. Otherwise, I was going to reach another Brutal Swing. They go for an Ice Punch here finally, and now I am going to bring in my Weezing and shield the Ice Punch from my opponent. My opponent's final Pokemon is a Drapion. I'm going to go for a Sludge before catching the Aqua Tail on my Furrets. I would much rather take an Aqua Tail on Furret than the Crunch, obviously, because Crunch is really going to hurt. Here I let the Crunch go, not really sure if I was going to survive or not, but thank goodness we survived. I could get the Swift off, but that was also a little bit risky because my opponent could have farmed us down with Drapion. Instead, they let Drapion go. They bring the Medicham back in, and we simultaneously KO the Medicham with our Furrets, and we win that because our Galarian Weezing is still alive in the back. In the next match, we're up against a Ferrothorn on the lead. I do have to watch out for potential Steel-type moves like Mirror Shot and Flash Cannon, but it looks like my opponent is running Acid Spray and Power Whip. They go for an Acid Spray and then they swap out into a Magcargo. Okay, I'm gonna bring in my Guzzlord for this Magcargo. I did go for a Brutal Swing just to weaken it a little bit, and here I decide to shield the second Rock Tomb because my opponent invested a shield, and my opponent's final Pokemon is going to be an Azu, so I didn't really need the Guzzlord. I might need the shield more for my Furret, that way I could more easily handle this Ferrothorn. They're going to go for a Power Whip, which is really going to hurt, and at this point, I'm just going to go straight for Swift. This Swift is damage buffed, by the way, because I went for a Trailblaze on the first move. Instead of going for a Power Whip, they go for an Acid Spray, which we live, and then I swap out into my Guzzlord, knowing that I could go for Sludge Bombs against Azu if they bring that back in. We finally get their final shield, and my opponent definitely could have farmed us down, but they go for an Ice Beam. I am going to bring in my Galarian Weezing now, go for a Sludge immediately, get the Azu out of the way, and then I can go for a Brutal Swing for their Ferrothorn, take the Ferrothorn out, and take that win. And with that, we are going to get a 4-1 in this next set. I should say that I also tried this team with Mandibuzz in place of Guzzlord. That also worked, but I was having so much more fun with Guzzlord. On to the next set and the next battle, we're going to be up against a Jumpluff on the lead, which is a really nice lead for us. My opponent swaps out immediately into a Shadow Drapion, and of course I am going to bring in my Guzzlord, which is absolutely going to wall this Pokemon. Now I am going to have to throw a move, otherwise my opponent was going to reach an Aqua Tail and I'm pretty sure it would KO. And now they are going to bring in that Jumpluff, but for some reason here, they go ahead and they shield our Brutal Swing, which might have been a misclick because now my opponent is going to have to take a Sludge from our Galarian Weezing, and I decide to shield here because this is a non-Shadow Jumpluff, and a lot of non-Shadow Jumpluffs like to run Acrobatics instead of Aerial Ace, so we do manage to shield that Acrobatics. And my opponent's final Pokemon is a Morpeko. Okay, let me try to explain what I did here. I swapped into Furret because I recognized that my opponent was going to be able to make it to 2 Psychic Fangs before we could take them out with our Weezing. So I swap into Furret to force my opponent to throw their energy. That way I can make it to the Sludge before my opponent can get a move off on our Weezing. and then they are going to go ahead and top left. Moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Typhlosion on the lead, which is not a great lead for us. I swap out immediately into my Furret, and we're actually going to be able to win switch here because my opponent is going to go for a Rock Tomb, but they're not going to be able to reach another move before we can reach another Trailblaze. They let it go, and we're even able to reach a Swift for their Typhlosion, get a shield from them, and Guzzlord is absolutely going to wall Typhlosion. I bring in Guzzlord. I'm not going to shield the Blast Burn, but then my opponent goes ahead and top lefts. I wonder what they had in the back. A second Grass type could have definitely been an option. In the next battle, we're up against a Superior on the lead, which is really good for us. My opponent swaps out immediately into a Blastoise. I go for a Sludge before bringing in my Furret. I don't necessarily have to win switch here because both my Weezing and my Guzzlord can handle the Superior, but either way, we're able to get rid of the Blastoise, and this is an entire team that is weak to Guzzlord. I'm gonna let my Furret go, bring in the Guzzlord, and as soon as my opponent sees the Guzzlord, they go ahead and they top left as well. Now in the next battle, we're not going to be as lucky with the lead because we are up against a Claydol. I swap out immediately into my Furret, and my opponent is staying in for some reason. I'm able to reach a Trailblaze before they make it to that Rock Tomb. We get a shield from them, and we draw out the Wigglytuff. Hopefully this is our only Fairy type. I was worried it would be double Fairy in the back, but I am going to bring in my Weezing here now, and I decide to shield because I was worried about a potential second Fairy in the back. I go for Sludge. This is going to KO the Wigglytuff, and then my opponent is going to bring that Claydol back in. I'm going to go for a Brutal Swing because I want to weaken them. Yep, they let it go, and my opponent's final Pokemon is not a Fairy type, thank goodness, but it is going to be a Shadow Cradily. Okay. I'm gonna have to let the first Rock Tomb go. I'm not sure if I will shield the second one. Most likely I will, because that Claydol is still alive and I have to get rid of it. But it looks like we should be able to reach another Brutal Swing for the Claydol. My opponent recognizes that I could have farmed them down. They swap out into Claydol, still take a Brutal Swing from our Guzzlord, and then we are going to take that win. Alright, this next team is just entirely weak to Galarian Weezing. My opponent leads Dragonair and they're staying in, which is telling me that they can't swap out into something that they have in the back. So of course I am going to invest shields into my Weezing. We managed to take a shield from them with the move that I throw on the Dragonair, but then my opponent swaps out and catches a Brutal Swing on their Sableye. I'm going to bring in my Furret for their Sableye, and we let this go. This ends up being a foul play. I thought my opponent would go for a Dazzling Gleam, but they don't. We do reach that Trailblaze. We get the Sableye out of the way, and then they bring the Dragonair back in. I decide to shield my Furret for some reason here, and my opponent ends up having a Wigglytuff in the back, which is terrible for our Guzzlord, but I should be able to reach two moves here. I'm not going to be able to reach two Sludges, which is why I had to bait with the Brutal Swing. But we reach the Sludge, take the Wigglytuff out, and we take that win. That could have been really dangerous for us, but my opponent didn't even end up knowing that I had the Guzzlord in the back. And that is going to be another 5-0 with this team. Maybe we're just getting lucky with the matchups, but so far, pretty decent performance. Alright, you guys want to see a loss? Here's a loss for you. This person actually said GG's to me on Discord, so while I wasn't going to use this entire set for my video, I decided to just clip out this battle because I felt bad not including it. But on the lead, we were up against a Gastrodon, which is a terrible lead for us, and then here I decide to double shield my Furret because I really don't want my Weezing aligned to that Gastrodon. We reach a Swift, get a shield from our opponent, and I am going to invest my second shield here, which is terrible for me because my opponent's final Pokemon is a Galarian Moltres, and a Brave Bird is really going to hurt. I go for a Sludge, get my opponent's final shield, and unfortunately here they are going to take our Galarian Weezing out, and they're even able to reach another Brave Bird for our Guzzlord, and at this point it's just game over for me. I am going to go ahead and top left because I cannot win that match. Alright, moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against Palasha, a really talented GBL player. And unfortunately for us, we're up against a Drapion on the lead. Now, I really wanted to try to catch an Aquatail on my Furret, but I wasn't really sure when she was going to throw it. So I end up taking both Aquatails on my Weezing. I shield the second one. And then here I go for a Brutal Swing, expecting my opponent to shield, but she ends up letting it go. And then she brings in a Claydol. Okay, I go for a Brutal Swing before the Mud Slap KOs, and then I am going to bring in a Guzzlord. Now, I was not expecting what's coming here, but my opponent is running Ice Beam on their Claydol. We end up taking it on Guzzlord. It does so much damage. If I had shielded that, this would have been a much easier win for me. But I am going to swap out into my Furret, and it's going to get really tricky because my opponent has a Furret of their own. I go for a Swift here, get my opponent's final shield, and I need to watch out for a catch, but also, by chance, I try to swap out into my Guzzlord, but it ends up looking like I do some 5-head play where I call that my opponent is going to go for a catch on the Drapion, but instead, in reality, I was just spam tapping the Guzzlord while my switch timer wasn't up. So we end up taking that win either way because I can go for the Swift on their Furret. Anyways, moving on to the next battle, we're going to be up against a Shadow Magneton on the lead, which actually isn't a terrible lead for us because you saw how much damage that Brutal Swing did. But I go for the Brutal Swing and then I swap into my Furret, and I still decide to shield the Magnet Bomb because I'm thinking that it might be the hardest hitting move on their team. We draw a Gliscor out, and I am able to survive 2 Aerial Aces and make it to a Swift, take the Gliscor out, and my opponent's final Pokemon is a Golisopod. This X-Scissor hurts way too much. I know it's super effective, but dang, that does so much damage. I do let it go on our Guzzlord, and at this point, I'm just going to let my Guzzlord go, and I'm really hoping that my Galarian Weezing is going to be able to take this win for us. I'm really hoping also that Galarian Weezing is going to be able to Fairy Wind this Pokemon down. At this point, I don't think I survive an Aqua Jet. I think here I tried to catch the Aqua Jet on my Furret, but we end up KOing their Magneton, and Furret survives a Shadow Claw to take the Golisopod out, and we take that win. Moving on to the next battle, this is where we struggle a little bit because we're going to be up against an opposing Galarian Weezing, and my opponent's Weezing is a shiny, so I can probably bet that this is going to have higher attack than we do. Both of us actually end up investing all of our shields into the lead, and my opponent actually gives up lead and swaps into a Credilli. I swear Credilli is the most used Pokemon in these battles, but I am going to bring in Guzzlord for the Credilli. I know that I am going to lose this matchup, but their Weezing is still very healthy, and I might as well just sacrifice my Guzzlord. I go for a Sludge Bomb here, but we're super debuffed, and it doesn't end up KOing their Credilli. They swap out with a Rock Tomb stored, and that is going to be really annoying later on. I catch the Sludge here on my Furret. I don't think this was the right move, but my opponent is going to be able to bring in that Credilli now and go for the Rock Tomb against our Furret. We live with a little bit of HP, but that just means that my opponent is going to be able to bring in the next Pokemon to farm us down. Okay, it's a Blastoise. I'm able to go for a Trailblaze against the Blastoise, but it was debuffed and we're not able to reach the Sludge to... I don't even think the Sludge would have taken them out, but my opponent is going to win that match. And with that, we have finally reached the last battle of the video. Guess what? My opponent is also running a Credilli on their team, but we do end up winning this one, giving us a 4-1 in this final set. Thank you guys so much for watching. I am going to go ahead and sign off here. If you guys like my content, please consider subscribing. Maybe leave a like, it helps me out so much. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye bye!